Welcome to Wealth Well Done. Together, we'll cover a wide range of important topics surrounding money and the impact it has on our lives. From the sophisticated and highly valuable planning techniques of the ultra-wealthy to the commonly underutilized biblical teachings. Together, we'll work to improve our relationship with money and our effectiveness in stewarding it well. Here's your host, Eric Scoville.
All right. Welcome to the 14th episode of the Wealth Well Done podcast. This is the show where we share our tactical, practical, and spiritual advice to help you do your wealth well done. Last week, we had Jeff Miller on as we went into money inside marriage and how to help navigate some of the problems that certainly arise inside marriages revolving money. Today, we are going to do an overview into estate planning. And for that, we are actually going to read a real disclosure here. And so the show is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Should not be construed as investment advice. I would definitely want you to consult with a financial advisor to help determine the best options for your particular circumstances. Again, no statement made during the show shall constitute tax or legal advice. That being said, I want to just stop here. 14 episodes into this, and I'm starting to get quite a bit of feedback from people. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Thank you for the feedback that you are giving me, whether in person or online. There's a fair amount of expense, both financial and time, to put this together. And obviously, I'm not doing this to get some financial return out of this. So the return that I get out of this is knowing that there's advice that's being received and that it's making an impact to other people. So I want to thank you for that. It makes all of this worth it. If it's good advice and it's doing something good for you, then I don't deserve credit for it. Give that to the Holy Spirit. He's the one speaking through me. If it's bad advice, then I'm going to recommend you go back and listen to that disclaimer again. You take it for what it is. That being said, let's jump in. Inside an estate plan, and the type of estate plan is going to vary by the person, by the assets. But I'm going to kind of speak to a little bit of the middle of the road here for a minute. A normal estate plan that I might be recommending to a client is going to include some of these key documents. It's going to have I'm going to recommend a living trust. And so a trust is we'll get into a little bit of the difference between a trust and a will here. When you use a will is something that just dictates some key things about the powers of attorney, the guardianship, and who gets your assets. So that's what happens inside a will. But anytime there's a will, it automatically goes to probate. So whenever you have a will and you pass, then the court is going to basically, for the most part, put a freeze on your assets, and they're going to basically put it out there to all creditors, give them time to come in and try to make a claim against any of the assets that are in your estate. Once that time has cleared and all of those things are passed, then the court will hand out the assets per the directions inside the will. And so a will is typically pretty cheap. You might get it done for $300 or so, but you wind up paying on the back end because you have probate costs. So when someone does pass and they use their will, there's normally a fee that the attorney who's going to help with probate is going to charge. And across the country, your average is kind of in the 3 to 7% range. Some states are a little bit higher, but you can actually get even significantly higher depending on the assets and the complexity inside the will. So you can see some pretty hefty fees on there. So the $300 you pay for a will compared to maybe the $3,000 or so that you'd pay for a trust. That difference in fee up front is typically made up and then a lot more on the back end. So I'm almost always recommending a trust for clients instead of a will, in large part because of that purpose. A will becomes public information. All the assets that are going to be distributed, or excuse me, not all the assets, but basically the fact that what's in there is going to be public information, whereas inside a trust, that stays private. The trust allows kind of an immediate transfer of assets, whereas the will is going to have that drawn out period. And then, like I said, the will is going to wind up having some significant cost associated with it. in terms of probate fees for the attorneys. So inside the plans that I'm going to be recommending to a client, you're going to have a living trust. You're going to have a living will as well. You're going to have a medical power of attorney is, amongst other things, going to put a description in there that if you were to maybe be on life support, what direction do you want to give the doctors in order to how to handle it? Do they want to keep you on and use every life-saving measure possible, or do you want them to pull the plug? There's a lot more that goes into it, but in general, you can kind of think of medical power of attorney as something like that. Who is going to make those decisions on your behalf? Financial power of attorney. This is going to be the person who's going to be in charge of deciding how to make these financial decisions for you after you pass as well. Pour over will. Pour over will is going to be on there. We're going to have a schedule of gifts. So those are kind of the main documents that you're going to see inside a typical estate plan: the living trust, the living will, the medical and financial powers of attorneys, pour over will, schedule of gifts. On top of that, then, where I like to have my clients do something a little bit different is two things. One, I'd like a letter to the beneficiaries. So I want my clients to write a letter to every person that they've designated as a beneficiary to really kind of communicate their heart behind this, whether if that's a child, whether they are going to be minor children or adults, but especially if they're minors, a way for you to write a deep and meaningful letter to them, sharing with them your thoughts on them, sharing with them how important it is that that you make this gift to them and what you hope they do with the gift as well. So especially to minors, that's really important. But even if you're doing it to older children, or if you're doing it to charities as well, a letter to the beneficiaries really helps communicate your heart behind the gift. And so I always encourage clients to do that. I've seen some really heartfelt, amazing letters there. The next one that makes some attorneys not so happy with it, but I still encourage it anyways, is a letter to the trustee. And so we're going to get into in a minute here what a trustee is, but think of that as the person who's in charge of executing the directions that you give inside the trust. And so I want you to write a letter to the trustee, really, again, communicating your heart and your intentions behind the gift. Most of the trust documents that are drafted up are going to be fairly boilerplate. They're drafted by attorneys to protect to the letter of the law. So there's not a lot of room in there for communication of what your heart is behind this. And there is some, and depending on the attorney, some attorneys do a really great job with this, and others don't. And so what I encourage people to do is to put a letter in saying, like, we really want to encourage our child. So we've got these things. We want to allow them to use this money for if the purchase of a home, for continuing education, for if they need it for medical reasons. Like, you can have some of these things in there that are fairly standard. But then we also might say, like, I'm an entrepreneur, and therefore I want my kids to take chances and to go start a business. And I don't want you to be so strict on them and their business plan that if they want $20,000 to go start a business, that you're gonna basically scare them away from it. And if it's their third or fourth business, I'm still okay with that too, so long as they are learning and growing and getting better. And so just whatever that might be for you, a letter to the trustee to help guide your heart, or guide them on how your heart is behind this. Now, it's illegal. The reason attorneys typically don't like this is because it is if you add it in there, it's a legal document. And so you're going to want your attorney to review that and to make sure that you're not saying anything in there that contradicts the language inside the trust. The big thing that I typically am asking for is that this is a gift for the enhancement of the life of the beneficiary, because every beneficiary is going to be different. If you've got young children, as a 5-year-old, you're not going to be able to tell what what type of child they're going to be when they're 22. And so you're going to have to put some level of trust into the trustee to make a good decision with this, and you don't want to have too much control from the grave. So therefore, I'm encouraging people to give the trustee some leniency, not make the trust too strict that that then the trustee doesn't have the ability to make their own judgment call. And so that's really the purpose behind this, is that the gift of the purpose of the trust is a gift for the enhancement of the life of this beneficiary, and therefore I may not be able to define exactly what that looks like here when writing this letter, here when forming this trust, but I'm asking you, the trustee, to use some discretion there, and I'm giving you permission to do so. Again, talk with your attorney about that, because there's a lot of nuances in that, but that's something that you don't see very often. It's just something that I found to be really impactful for my clients. I think I may have covered this, but when we get into the wills, there are some states that don't allow you to charge a percentage, and they don't allow the attorneys to charge a percentage. So inside the probate, so where you might see this 3 to 7, 4 to 8% average range, depending on the state. Inside, like Illinois, for example, doesn't allow a percentage to be charged, but rather you charge a fee based off of the amount of services rendered, and you're going to see that range $4,000 to $6,000 for a really smooth, easy process without any complications. But the average, according to the estate and probate legal group, the average is actually $12,500 is the probate fee inside Illinois. So $3,000 to do a trust, $300 to do a will. You save money up front. The trust gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more. It's a much better process all around, but you're going to pay more up front. And then on the back end, you don't have those probate fees. So that's one of the main reasons why we like using a trust. We are going to, I'm not going to have time today to get into this, but I'm going to have an attorney come on here at a later episode, and we are going to get into some of the high level and very specific estate planning techniques. So we're going to get into generational skipping trust. We're going to get into spousal lifetime access trust. We're going to get into charitable remainder trust and some of these other things that are more complex. And I am not an attorney, so I am speaking from my level of knowledge. We will bring someone on who speaks from a much higher technical expertise to really dig in on those questions, similar to how we've been doing it with other guests so far. Okay, next up, we are going to cover beneficiary selection. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this one, but this is one that most people just make the automatic assumption that it's their kids and or your spouse as well. So kids and spouse, and just also important to remember that it doesn't have to be. You can choose. There can be someone that's been near and dear in your life, whether they are significantly younger or older, doesn't matter. But you can name anyone as a beneficiary. What a lot of people actually do is they also name charities. And so you'll see people who might name, if they had 4 kids, they might name each of their kids, a 20% beneficiary of the assets in the estate, and charity or a couple charities to get the remaining 20%, or something along those lines. So you see people add, basically gift their life insurance policies to a charity. So anyways, there's a number of ways that you can go about this, but including charity in your estate plan is a phenomenal approach, and I'm a huge proponent of that. So definitely don't limit your beneficiaries to your immediate family, I guess, is the main thing that I'm trying to communicate here. The next thing, which is a big one, is the trustee selection. So again, like I mentioned, trustee is someone who's they're going to be in charge of executing whatever you draft up into that document. And so this can be an individual person. It can also be an entity. And so this can be Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe can be in charge of deciding which financial firm we're going to use for the management of the portfolio. You can it can be someone who's going to be making decisions on the real estate that the trust is going to own. There's going to be, excuse me, you're going to have the trustee be someone who is also going to decide if a child makes a proposal that they would like to bring money out of the trust for a certain schooling, for traveling abroad, for starting a business. The trustee is going to be the one who is giving the blessing to distribute those funds or not for those purposes. So having a trustee, having the right trustee is is critical inside of here. You need someone who is financially financially competent. So you need a high financial literacy person in here. So the trustee can be the same person as the guardian, or it can be different. And we'll get into that a little bit here as well. If you choose an entity, so this might be a credit union, for example, that has trustee services, then they have their own guidelines that they typically operate off of for how they execute on a trust. And so that's where you can meet with them ahead of time. They'll share with you their fees that they're going to charge to be your trustee. And then you can, because it's a serious job inside of here. So especially if you are naming someone who's not an entity, make sure you consider that allowing them to get compensated in some way for being the trustee, because there is important legal work that they have to do behind here, and they actually have legal responsibility. Trustees can be sued by beneficiaries, so you want to make sure that the trustee is fairly compensated for the work that you're asking them to do. The next thing is the guardian. And so guardian, this is for parents of children with minors. This is the main motivator for them to do the estate planning. It's also the main hurdle that they have that winds up causing them to never actually complete their estate plan. I think most of my clients have come in and known they needed to do a estate plan, but hadn't actually done it yet. And typically one of the biggest reasons behind that is they couldn't decide who they wanted to have as a guardian. You've got a family member, a couple, family members on both sides of the family who may seem like good potential fits in some areas, in other areas not. There's reasons for hesitation. There's arguments between husband and wife on whose side of the family is a better fit. So this becomes a big point of contention inside estate planning. So I want to stop here and kind of dig in on this one for a little bit. If you have a guardian, we're talking about children that are under 18, or if you have a child with special needs, that a guardian would be appointed. It's important for you to decide, because otherwise the court's going to. So we want to leave the decision in your hands rather than the courts of who is the best guardian for your children. And while the courts certainly are going to make their best decision that they can off that, people can, especially when there's money involved, people can get put on a fake face, and things can get different. So you might find someone pretending to be better suited than they are because of the benefits behind this. Because hopefully, if you've done an estate plan, you also have put some life insurance in place. You've done some other things to make sure there are assets there to cover your children. And so certainly people can view that as an opportunity as well. And so we want to make sure that you are the one making the decision on who should be the guardian. Factors that we're looking at here: the quality of the person, in general, the quality of the person, the quality of important factors to you. This might be faith, it might be health, it might be their view on education. It might be proximity to where your kids currently live. You don't want, if you've got a great, sister who can handle it, but she lives in Montana and you live on the other side of the country. Well, you might not want your kids to have to move across the country. And so there are things like that factor in this as well. It doesn't have to be a family member. It's a very important piece of this. It doesn't have to be a family member who takes over your kids. Now, certainly that's by far and away the most typical practice, and typically, I guess not typically, but oftentimes that's the best the best approach, especially because they're going to know your children so well. They're probably going to have a deeper love for them. But if you've got other friends that you are close with and that you're closely aligned with, that they can make a candidate just the same. The next things that you're going to start to consider are their capacity to take on your children. If you've got, for example, we've got 3 kids. If you're considering another family that has 2 or 3 or however many children, and even if they're a great family, do they have the capacity to take on 3 more children? That should also be a factor in you deciding who's going to be your top choice for guardian. In if they're not sound financially, this is where, again, that trustee does not have to be the same person as the guardian. So if you've got someone who you think would just absolutely love and care for your children, but they don't make the best financial decisions, a trustee can be someone else who might be better suited to help guide them financially. And then they're going to be monitoring the budget of how much money the trust delivers to the guardian to take care of your children. And so then the trustee can help out there. Another important thing to consider here is that you're not just limited to selecting one person or one family as guardian. You can have a list, and what you need to do is rank them in priority, or in just in a hierarchical ranking. So that way, this is choice number one. If choice number one is no longer available or chooses to decline, because they can absolutely decline that, then here's number two, here's number three. And so you can have a list of people in terms of your preference of who would be the top choice there as well. Now, we're going to get into the distribution of the assets. And so Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. There's a lot that goes into the distribution of assets and what you're doing to hand this down. We're going to try to grab a few of those pieces and just cause, either bring some clarity or challenge the way you think a little bit on this. A big one is equal is not the same thing as fair. And so while you might want to be fair to all of your children, it does, or beneficiaries, because again, it doesn't have to just be children. That doesn't have to be the same thing as equal. So if you have two kids, it doesn't have to be 50-50. Things that might come into this. So if one of them's involved in the family business, if one of them has been, or maybe even more involved with producing the assets that are now inside your estate, if one of the, based on, if they've got varying levels of financial success, financial literacy, or especially financial discipline, if you have someone who spends everything that they have and are always looking for more, them getting assets, whether the same amount or even in the same way, and we'll hit that here in just a second, may not be the best thing. So fair doesn't have to be the same thing as equal. When you are distributing the assets, they can get straight cash. They can get the other assets, whether you have assets in an IRA or some other investment account, real estate, whatever. So they can get those assets. They can also get things that are maybe a little bit more controlled in terms of their access to them. You see people use life insurance policies that they have funded in, or annuities and other things where it's a controlled release of the assets that they're able to access as well. And so there are things that you can do there to control that. If you want to hand down the money to someone else, but they aren't necessarily ready yet to do that and to be good stewards of those resources. The next thing in going after the distribution of assets is the timing behind this. And the first thing I always talk to people about is, do you want to give with warm hands or cold hands? So your estate plan does not have to only be executed upon your death or the death of you and your spouse. So you see there's gifting. So you're allowed to gift up to a certain amount per person. And so every year the government changes that a little bit more to allow this. So just for simple math, when it was $15,000, if you and your spouse could each give $15,000 to, if you had a family, if one of your children was married and had two kids, then you and your spouse could each give $15,000 to every kid inside, or every person inside that family. So each of you could give, $15,000 to all four of them. So basically that winds up being $120,000 that you're able to give, that family inside there per year without there being any taxable event. And so those numbers are not there now. It's just using that for simple math. But the concept behind that is your giving doesn't have to start when you pass away. Often, if you think about the fact of if you have if you are, remember back to when you were in your 20s or 30s, and the financial situation that you were in then compared to someone who's in their 50s or 60s, when parents are more likely to be passing away, the impact of you getting a smaller amount of money in your 30s is far greater than the impact of you getting some larger amount of money in your 50s or 60s. Because hopefully by your 50s and 60s, you're more financially established, and a gift to you doesn't make as big of an impact. Whereas in your 30s, when you've got young kids, you're trying to grow the business or trying to build up your income, and you're more likely to be in more debt, then a gift then makes a lot bigger impact. So that's something to definitely figure out. The idea of giving when you are alive allows you to see the impact of it. If you're giving to charity, think about the idea of what type of difference you can make in the lives of the people you're trying to affect with your charity today versus waiting, hopefully however long until you actually pass away. The idea being that, the growth of your impact can be more significant starting sooner than waiting. And so giving with warm hands versus cold hands is certainly a big thing with this. However, from a tax standpoint, it's often better to wait until you pass. And depending on where the assets are, if you have assets in a traditional IRA, then those assets are going to be taxed when they come out of the account, basically no matter what. However, if you have assets in what's called a non-qualified account or some account that is taxable, then when you hand those assets down, your beneficiaries get a step up in basis. So just use a kind of generic example here. If you owned stock and what you had paid $10,000 for, you've held on to it for a long time and now it's worth $100,000. If you hand that down to your children the day before you die, then they owe taxes on that $90,000 difference, that $90,000 capital gain. They're going to owe taxes on that. If that gets handed down to them upon your death, then there's zero taxes owed and their new basis is now $100,000. So if they chose to sell that stock the day after they inherited it, they wouldn't owe any taxes on it. And so there's certainly a reason to wait to hand down certain assets. And this is where, again, you working with your financial advisor, your estate planning attorney to decide which assets to hand down when becomes very important. So there's no blanket statement in this. Another important thing in timing is the idea of if you're putting assets into an irrevocable trust. And so first we need to describe what an irrevocable and revocable trust are. So a revocable trust is something that you as the grantor, the one who is making the gift, it's something that you're able to go in and change. You can revoke that. You can decide that that kid has now started doing something that we don't approve of, and so therefore we're changing the way this trust works. If you have an irrevocable trust, you have made a gift that you no longer have rights to. You can make changes to it only upon the agreement by the beneficiaries of this. So what the IRS looks at, and when you make a gift to an irrevocable trust, is now moved out of your estate. This becomes very important as the complexities inside your estate planning get higher. If we make a gift to an irrevocable trust, it's now outside of our estate. We'll get back to why that's more important here in a minute. But from a timing standpoint, some people, when they have a parent who's getting ready to maybe go into a nursing home, they often are trying to drain the assets that are inside that parent's name. So that way the parent, basically the government can't access those funds anymore. The problem with that is there's a clawback period. And so a nursing home or the government can maybe go after some of those assets that were in there, even if they've been moved out of the estate, because they hadn't been moved out of the estate long enough ago. And so that's where timing becomes important there. But this irrevocable and revocable aspect of your trust, of your trust and of your estate becomes important when we start talking about estate taxes. So federally today, it's for 2023, it's $12.92 million. So $12.92 million per person that you're allowed to hand down out of your estate without any federal tax being applied. So you have that $12.92 million exclusion per person inside a marriage. The above 12.92 million per person is a kind of a graduated tax that starts at 18% and goes up to 40%. So basically anything over $1 million above that 12.92 is then going to be taxed at a 40% estate tax rate that goes to the federal government. Beyond that, you have 13 states that have an estate tax as well, which range from anything above $1 million to anything above $13 million, or I think it's a little bit under $13 million, that they would then assess their own tax on, and at a varying rate. On top of that, you have 6 states that have an inheritance tax. Difference between an inheritance tax and estate tax. Inheritance tax taxes the beneficiary as they inherit the money or the assets. The estate tax taxes the estate before the assets are even moved out of it. In Maryland, if you are lucky enough to live in Maryland, then you get both. You get both an inheritance tax and an estate tax. So that revocable trust, irrevocable trust, when you move assets outside of your estate, then it's what the value was at the moment of the gift. So, for example, if you were buying stock into some company, or you have a privately held investment that you think is going to do well, and you move that into an irrevocable trust today, while the value is at $20 million, the company is valued at $20 million. So whatever your percentage of the assets are, let's say that you own $200,000 of equity in this company. When that company grows from 20 million to $2 billion in value, and then your percentage of equity also does the same, then you're only that $12.92 million exclusion that you have, only the $200,000 that you initially put into it comes off of that. So now you've used up $200,000 of your $12.92 million, and so it doesn't matter what the growth of that is once it's inside the irrevocable trust. So that's an important piece behind this. And if you set this up correctly, inside some of these like spousal lifetime access trusts, we want to set up so you can actually interchange assets inside of there as well. If you have one performing better or worse than another, then we can maybe make changes inside of there to move that around to maximize the tax efficiency there. Next thing that we want to go over here is the idea of hoarding wealth versus giving it away. Many people just assume that they're trying to collect as much wealth as possible. They're going to hand it down to their kids, and they really don't give much thought to the ripple effect of that. And so, first and foremost, what do your kids really want? Hopefully, if you've done this right, the money isn't the main thing that your kids want from you. They want time with you. They want to be validated by you. They want help through their issues with you because you've been there and done that. You can see around the corner to let them know that this thing that feels like a really big deal isn't as big of a deal, and just help them, love them, be with them. That's what they want more than you accumulating more assets that you're going to hand down to them upon your death. There's a lot of downside to handing money down, and an extreme responsibility that's on you as the grantor that you need to take seriously. Oftentimes, as wealth is generated, normally your kids. So if you're generation one, you've been the one who's generated the wealth. We're going to call you G1, generation one. Your children have seen the work ethic that's taken to produce that. Hopefully, you've been able to do that without, in a way, making them just a byproduct of your life, and you've poured into them. Obviously, a lot of people who've built up significant wealth have done so at the expense of their family. So hopefully that's not you, but either way, generation two has typically seen the work ethic that's gone into creating the wealth. Their children, generation three, at least know of they probably have a relationship with you as their grandparents, and you've been able to help communicate that somewhat to them of what it took to build the wealth that we have. By generation four, if you think about this, can you name your great grandmother's maiden name? And so if you can't name your great grandmother's maiden name, just use that as a bit of a thing for you to realize, like generation 4 typically doesn't understand where the money came from or what it took to get there. And they are typically much poorer stewards of the funds than any of the previous generations. And so by generation 4, you see a lot of problems happening inside those families. And so there becomes a big responsibility to you, being the wealth creator and the one who's handing it down, to make sure that you help each future generation be ready to handle the kind of the burden of the assets that are you're giving them. And so when you think about this, when someone is a trust fund baby, when someone has when someone's given a large amount of wealth, it changes a lot of things. It changes the pressure for them to need to do as well in school. It changes if you're able to buy their way onto the sports team, even if they didn't deserve to make it, that changes a lot of things. That if they didn't have to get a job in their younger years, or if they had a job that was with dad's buddy, and they didn't have to try, they didn't have to go through an interview, they were allowed to screw up more and not pay the consequences of it, or especially if they worked inside your company. So as you go through these things, they never had to deal with a clunker of a car that may or may not make it to where they're going. They didn't have the same relationships that they built up with friends. If everyone knows that they're wealthy, oftentimes they've got a different depth of friendship. And so with that, then what winds up happening is you rob children of character building opportunities. And so if you look at what made you successful, the wealth that you're creating, most often, the person that I'm asking that question is going to say, well, it was the grit and determination. It was when we got down to our last $1,000 and we got denied by the bank, by 6 different banks. And you had all these things that really shaped you, that challenged you, that built your character up, that helped you become who you are today, and that build the success that you've had. And if you rob your children or your grandchildren or great grandchildren of those character building opportunities, you can't even be upset with them when they start to have some of the problems that a lot of these kids have. And so from that standpoint, it just becomes so critically important that as you're handing down assets to them, that you're doing it in a way that helps enhance their life and doesn't rob them of the ability to build their own character. As we mentioned, the idea around relationships, you need to teach them, like they need to actually go through training on relationships, so that way they can know who's trying to use them for their money, but B, they're gonna have issues around knowing, are they being used? Do people really like me for me? And especially when it comes to dating, that becomes even more important. So helping them become really mature and really good in relationships is going to be critical when you hand down wealth. Otherwise, if you don't take that responsibility seriously, you are better off, and your children and grandchildren are better off with you not handing down the wealth than handing it down to them without equipping them to deal with the extra burden that it becomes. And so then, the idea being, if you can control how much wealth they get and when they get it, because inside a trust, you can set it up that they don't just get all the assets when they turn 18, like a will. A will is just set up that these people get the assets. You don't get to dictate when. And so when a child turns 18, here you go. Here are all the assets that you have. And most of you can probably understand that when you were 18, had you been given $1 million or whatever the value of your estate is, you probably wouldn't have been the wisest with that. And so from that standpoint, inside a trust, you're able to dictate this that says, I'm going to give my children 10% of the assets in the trust when they turn 25. I'll give them another 10% when they turn 30, another 10% or maybe 30% when they turn 35, and then the remainder of the trust assets when they turn 45. And so something like that allows them to get a little boost, another little boost, but not enough that they can just sit back and do nothing. We want to encourage them to go out and be enterprising, to go make something of themselves, and to not just be the child of the grantor of the wealth. That we want them to have their own identity, their own purpose in life behind that. And then we also wanted to help them understand the responsibility. Like if they receive the wealth, there's nothing wrong with being a child of a wealthy family. But you have a responsibility inside that. And when you view yourself as stewards of the resources that God's given, there's going to be you need a high level of humility, and that's very tough inside a wealthy child who's grown up in immense wealth to be humble. But basically, we want to create the opposite of entitlement. We want to help create humility inside them, that they recognize that they've been given a gift that a lot of people haven't been given, and they see the responsibility that they have to do that. And so that means they're going to be leaning into philanthropy, helping them understand that this isn't just something for us, that this is something that we're meant to go and use. For me, I'm going to say use for the furtherment of the gospel, using for the things that are important to me, human trafficking, using to help combat human trafficking and bring people to freedom. But at the same time, whatever that is for you, and for you and for your family, we can set up foundations, we can set up donor advice funds, we can set up other things that help them understand how to steward that well. And so that just becomes this other critical piece behind the idea of someone who's inheriting tremendous wealth. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up there. That's a kind of an overview of a lot of the components inside of an estate plan. Again, please consult with an attorney, with your financial advisor of how these apply to you. And I just want to encourage you to do it. Go ahead and get that estate plan done, because we hear the stories, especially in my career, we hear the stories all the time of the people who didn't. And if your estate's not in order, it becomes a major mess to beneficiaries, even if you have assets, even if they are already financially stable. And especially if you have minor children, or if there's just so many reasons that we would really encourage you to take the time, save the money to do this correctly, and to execute an estate plan. My recommendation is a trust in a general sense, but just a simple will might be the best for you. So again, please seek out some counsel and get that over the finish line. Thank you for listening in. Next week, we are going to have Chuck Day with the International Justice Mission is going to be on. The International Justice Mission, IJM, they protect people in poverty from human trafficking and modern day slavery. And so that's going to be a really fascinating episode. You're going to hear a lot of stories that'll probably move and shake you, but that's going to give you hope that there's some great things happening. There are people out there who are having success in combating these modern issues that we have. As always, if this is valuable to you, I just ask you to share the content with others. Subscribe if you want. If you want to keep getting notified that these episodes are coming out. And thank you for your time. We'll see you next week.
Thank you again for listening to Wealth Well Done. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player, and together we'll continue to improve our relationship with money and our effectiveness in stewarding it well.